Hi, this is Dan Joseph of the China Learning Curve. Is it time to abandon China? This is the third of our four-part blog series analyzing this question. This post focuses on the legal environment for foreign firms in China. Is China targeting foreign firms? Is China becoming a hostile environment for foreign companies? These kind of questions are being asked with increasing frequency relative to China. Now, for many questions relative to China, the answer is often both yes and no, and this question certainly falls into that category. In this blog, we'll try to cite the issues that we think are most relevant to this question, hopefully helping you make up your own mind, but also providing our point of view for you to consider. Let's open with 3 points that help frame the current discussion. First, all emerging markets are challenging, and weakness in the rule of law is a big reason why. China is no exception. On many fronts, China is improving relative to the rule of law. But the fact is that regardless of what issue is at hand, China's system does not have the kind of transparency and procedural regularity that would make foreigners more comfortable. Hopefully, they will get there someday, but China is not there yet. Secondly, considering the challenges to doing business in emerging markets like China, China has actually done extremely well attracting foreign investment. And a major reason why is that it has traditionally granted special treatment to foreign companies, tax breaks, access to special areas where it is easier to do business. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it has been easy for foreign companies to do business in China. But these kind of special benefits, this white glove treatment, if you will, has made the challenges more worthwhile. Well, it is safe to say that at this point, the era of white glove treatment for foreign companies is over. As China has matured economically, it has taken the view that domestic investment is as important as foreign investment, so it is trying to treat both the same. That's not to say China is no longer interested in attracting foreign investment. China still recognizes that it needs foreign capital to grow and develop. But China is not as interested in putting foreigners on a pedestal as it has in the past. Thirdly, China is, in many areas, trying to assert itself legally and to more proactively enforce its own laws. The crackdown on corruption over the last few years is one good example. Another would be the enforcement of antitrust rules. 10 years ago, China's economy was less than half of its current size. Back then, foreign companies were mostly interested in buying things from China. Now China is the world's second largest economy, and foreign companies are trying to sell into China, which means they are more deeply engaged in China than ever before. China is adjusting to this new position of increased importance, which inevitably results in more legal issues. So to recap, China's legal proceedings are not entirely transparent. It is no longer holding foreign companies on a pedestal, and it is more proactively asserting its judicial authority. That sounds great, right? Makes you want to hurry up and invest in China. Yet, when you look at specific cases that many cite to support the idea that foreigners are at risk, they just don't seem to be that bad. Let's look at a few. First, a corruption case that received a lot of attention. GlaxoSmithKline, a global pharmaceutical firm, was investigated for corrupt business practices and eventually fined $500 million for a case that involved sex tapes, bribery allegations, and overzealous benefits to doctors. Now, that doesn't sound good, but the fact is that far more Chinese companies have been caught in China's anti-corruption campaign than foreigners. Considering the extent of the corruption problem in China and how many Chinese have been prosecuted for it, it isn't difficult to imagine that at least some foreign companies might have engaged in go-along to get-along practices and cross the line as well. So it hardly seems like this case demonstrates a bias against foreign firms. There have also been some antitrust investigations of technology firms, most prominently Qualcomm and Microsoft. Qualcomm, which sells chips and technology for smartphones, actually received a very high fine, almost $1 billion, for antitrust violations in China. No action has been taken yet against Microsoft in that investigation. But we have to note, Qualcomm is being investigated by antitrust authorities in the US and Europe as well. And we all know that Microsoft has faced antitrust investigations in many jurisdictions, including the US and Europe. So it is simply too early to say how China's treatment of Microsoft or Qualcomm might differ from other countries. Next, we have the fact that foreign auto companies were also fined for antitrust violations in China, mostly related to pricing issues. At first blush, this might look like the government overstepping its boundaries to intervene in the market at the expense of foreign companies. But at closer inspection, it doesn't look that bad. First, it needs to be said that foreign automakers are actually doing quite well in China, with a market share of roughly 70% and prices that are often twice as high as other markets. Secondly, the investigations, for the most part, were confined to a small part of the auto business, spare parts, for which foreign company prices are generally 3 to 4 times as high as other markets. Lastly, there appears to have been a very legitimate legal issue at the heart of the cases in China. For example, in their agreements with dealers, foreign auto companies prohibit the dealers from selling any parts that are not made by the auto companies themselves. In many other countries, such restrictions in dealership agreements are not permitted. Furthermore, an organization representing European automakers actually asked the Chinese government to intervene in the market to prevent them from being excluded. So given all of the above, it is difficult to say that the foreign auto companies in China have been treated terribly. While the above cases weren't that bad for foreign companies, that doesn't mean there haven't been some troubling issues lately. For example, a British and Chinese American couple who are corporate investigators were given sentences of 2 to 2.5 years for illegally gathering background data on Chinese companies and individuals. Business intelligence, what data can be collected, who can collect it, what they can do with it, how it is collected, etc., is becoming a serious issue for foreign businesses in China, mainly because 1, the rules surrounding it are not exactly clear in China, and 2, China invokes national security and criminality far more readily than other countries. So that is an issue that remains fairly troubling. Lastly, a brief comment about the issue that I think has received the most attention recently, and that is actions the Chinese government have proposed that would exclude U.S. high-tech firms from the Chinese market. Now, this is a big issue and very complex, and I don't want to get into the details. I just want to make one point. You remember Edward Snowden and the NSA leaks. What you might not know is that part of those leaks suggested that U.S. high-tech firms had cooperated with the U.S. government in ways that would make it easier for the U.S. government to spy on telecommunications networks around the world. Now, whether or not that's true, the fact is it did a fair amount of damage to America's reputation around the world and hurt the sales of U.S. high-tech firms in many countries, not just China. So some people have said that China is proposing these new restrictions on foreign tech firms in China as using the political issue as a smokescreen. They're really just trying to protect their own companies. There might be some truth in that. But the fact is, most people would admit there's a legitimate political issue here, and it is America's own actions that have kind of created that issue. So it's hard to look at this case and say the Chinese are simply acting arbitrarily and unfairly trying to exclude foreign companies from the market. So, given all of the above, what's the answer? Is China targeting foreign companies? Is China becoming unbearably difficult for the foreign business community? You have to make up your own mind. I would say no. China still knows that it needs foreign investment to grow. It still knows it needs to engage the global economy. But in this area, like many others, China is going through a transition. For me, the issue is less whether China is more difficult now. It has always been challenging with respect to legal and regulatory environment. But is it getting better fast enough? To continue to grow, to become an economy that produces its own intellectual property and that allows foreign companies to become deeply engaged in the economy, China has to develop a legal system that people can trust. It hasn't done so yet, which to a certain degree is understandable, as all emerging markets struggle with the rule of law. We can't say China hasn't made any progress whatsoever. It has, but it needs to go further. If it doesn't, China could end up genuinely scaring foreign companies away, and that would have a serious impact on China's future development.